Okay. Hey everybody, it's Thaddeus from Sprout City Studios again with another video on some helpful tips for you in the studio. Today we're going to be talking about drums and tuning drums, specifically getting them ready for recording, because there's just so many different ways to approach this concept. Figured we'd do a little video on some different things to think about. So one of the things to think about when you're doing drum head choice and tuning is whether or not you want a single ply, a double ply, if you want to treat the head in some way with something heavy to add mass to the vibrations to soak up some of the high frequency, call that damping. One of the things that I want to make clear that doesn't often get talked about when I have newer drummers in who haven't really had much time to tune their drum kit, I try to help them get aware of what's going on with the actual heads. So just to break this down for a second, the way that all drum heads are made nowadays is with this plastic that forms around a mold at the factory that they warm up a little bit to get this shape in it. And when it goes into this metal ring, it's wrapped around a piece of plastic that's glued with a heat sealing glue around the edge of that rim. And when you first put it on a drum, when you first get it onto a drum, what's going to happen is once you get it to an even tension, like that's the best place to start, is to get all of the lugs somewhat close to the same amount of torque. Once you have that built, you're going to need to stretch out the head a bit more, because if you don't, it's going to still crack along certain edges. Like you can hear this one, it's still, see that, the crackle? That crackle when you first put a new head on is part of that head getting used to being in that position. So what I recommend, and a lot of people are really scared to do this, but I really don't think it's ever caused me any sort of problem, is to actually get your body weight onto the head. So this head was just put on here, and just to show you what I typically do, once I get an even tension around the whole drum, I'll actually get on it with a knee and do this. You hear how it's cracking, this crackle? Just put some even pressure all around it to get that kind of a cracking sound, to get everything loosened up to how it's gonna be once you get this thing tight. Because once that thing's on there and you get a good tension around everything, as soon as you start playing it, if you haven't done that, you're gonna get some warping. Different sides are gonna stretch differently because of that unfinished cracking. The next thing I want to talk about is the underside, the head on the bottom of your drums. If that's something that you require for the tone of your drums to get a resonance that kind of hangs out, boo, whatever the note's going to be, tuning this is the same thing as tuning the top. If you put a new head on here, you're going to have to stretch that glue or it's going to change over time. And I find that most drummers don't spend enough time tuning the bottom head, and it makes a big difference in the overall tone of the drum, as we're going to show you. So I've just put these heads on here. They're brand new. So I'm going to crack this one a little bit more real quick. I really love this kit. This is an Orange County percussion kit from the early thousands, and it just has this oomph to it that I just adore. Especially if you're playing some post-rock or heavy music, it's just perfect. So that's not bad right off the get. Let's hear this side. Okay, this is a little bit of a thicker head than I usually use for bottom drums, bottom drum heads, but I feel like this particular kit needs something to add a little bit of extra mass to the bottom. Otherwise, it kind of has this high-pitched tang. You know, if you're getting too much of that ee note up there, it usually has to do with your bottom head resonating at higher pitches than you want it to. So adding some mass can work. If you want to just add a bunch of tape, sometimes I'll actually roll up toilet paper and I'll stick it on here with tape just to soak up. Or you can buy that moon gel stuff and use whatever. It doesn't matter what it is as long as it gets the job done the way that you want. And then just picking the tuning of the drum with a low tom like this, there's just so many different ways to go, and usually it has to do with how you have your snare, your kick, and your higher toms tuned. But with something like this, I'm probably gonna start with it high like this, And then I'm gonna move it down in tone. So I've been using a little trick to do, because I'm doing this whole drum kit, I put a drum key inside of a drill, which is not a bad idea when you have a lot of these to pull off. But for fine point work, it's way too heavy-handed. So I'm gonna loosen these up, and once I have something that's pretty similar tension around the whole drum, I'll actually start loosening them up by a quarter turn on two opposite lugs. So with these two opposite lugs, you can get kind of a similar resonance across the drum. This one still seems high to me. So I'm gonna do this one and this one. Okay. That's closer to the note that I think this thing should probably be at. Low. What I usually do is I'll tap around about this far in front of each lug, and I'll just listen to the overall tonality of the drum. Sometimes it's nice to mute the bottom head so that you're not getting confused with that. See how these are all taking different notes now? Let me point the mic at this so you guys can really hear it. In this case, I'm going to take the ones that sounded higher pitch. I'm going to loosen them up a little bit. Let me go just a tiny bit. And I don't know if you guys can hear the beating in the head, but it's just like when you get two guitar strings that are really close to in tune, you hear the beating of the two strings, like you'll hear this wah 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 wah. Try to get rid of that as much as possible on the top head, because that's going to influence the overall tone. So once I get it close to where I want it to be overall in pitch, like the note that I'm going for, that still seems a little too high for this kit. So I'm going to go down on everybody just the same amount. Across the board, see how close we can get. You can speed up these sections. That's better. That's better. Okay, so. Okay, now let's play with the bottom head open. Okay, that's pretty good. It's a good place to start. So let's listen to this bottom head again. I might want this one to come up a skosh. And usually what I found over the years is that once you get a tone that you like on the top head, whatever the beater head is, the bottom head is actually better to have that be just a slight bit higher, either a half step or a whole step in notes, because it creates a really interesting resonance. So I'm going to tighten this one up just a touch, see how it goes. There's that note. Actually, it sounds pretty good lower. Okay, so now that we have this close, see how it's a lot more even keeled in tone? I'm going to set this up real quick, and I'm going to put a mic on the top and the bottom, and then we'll solo them out so that you can hear the difference between the top and the bottom head. Okay, so we have this thing set up just like a normal low tom if somebody was playing it. And I just want to hit this a couple times, and we'll just solo back and forth between the top mic and the bottom mic. So here we go. So and one of the other things that we do a lot in the studio is we'll coat them with something. Like sometimes we'll literally lay a part of a towel over them. Sometimes we'll put that moon gel if it's having too much high frequency resonance, or if there's some you know, playing the snare drum is making this resonate more than we'd like for the rest of the drum kit. Just sometimes patting it down a bit can be really helpful. But all the things that I just showed you are very particular to the way that I have learned to tune drums over the years that work in the studio. You might have a different method that works for you, and that's totally fine. I just want you to have some things to think about when you're in the studio, making sure that you're getting the resonance that you want out of your drum, that it's tuned correctly for the rest of the drum kit, that it's not interfering with anything else going on in the song. Sometimes it actually makes sense to retune the toms depending on the pitch of the song, depending on the tune. So you can go crazy with it if you want, but just getting something that has a good resonance and a good bump so that when that tom is struck, it has power and tension and clarity. No matter what you do, those are the things that you want to try to get out of a tom drum most of the time. So with kick drums, one of the things that you want to pay attention to is an even tuning across all the lugs. But as you can see, it's a bit more difficult to hear precise tunings. I've been working on this for about 15 minutes to try to get it to that level of even. And it's going to really depend on the type of drum head that you end up going with. One of my personal favorites for a double ply kick drum that has a lot of mass to it, it actually has a ring of felt attached on the inside. It's by Aquarian. It's called the Super Kick 2, and it's great for getting a lot of attack, not a whole lot of hanging out low boom body, just attack, a lot of pressure, and then gets out of the way. A lot of heavy rock people like it, but I've used this drum head on a lot of different sessions to good result. So just play around. Different drum heads are going to give you a wide variety of tones. But this one, this particular drum, it's a 22-inch kick. It's meant to be pretty deep and beefy, so I've tuned it pretty low. So now with this flat like this, I'll just lift up one side so that we can hear the inside resonance a little better. Here we go. See how it's just boom and not a whole lot of oof. So that might not be the right tone for what you're after, but getting an even tuning across all of these and then playing with whether you need it higher or lower depending on, I usually work back and forth between the snare drum and the kick drum to get the different pitches that I want. And then you go on from there. So one of the other things I want to talk about as far as kick drums are concerned is a lot of times I find that people who don't cut a hole in the front head, the non-beater head, unless that's really the tone you're going for, which is kind of this really long decay, like boo, kind of extended deep lows, it's not really going to give you a whole lot of options in the mix. Some people who are really good at tuning their drums and they know exactly what they want, they can get exactly what they want out of both sides of the drum having no hole. But a lot of the time, I actually prefer having a big hole in the front, so much so that I've taken it to the next level. A lot of times, I'll actually remove the entire front head. And if you do this, there are some negatives because a lot of the time these lugs, where the screws for the lugs go in, they'll rattle. So as you can see here, we've put tape around all of these. And this is just for a certain kind of kick drum sound that we use sometimes in sessions, sometimes for rehearsals. But this gives you a wide variety of microphone options because you can put them all over the place, far away, close to it, but you're also going to get more bleed in from the cymbals and the overheads and stuff. So sometimes it's nice to put a pillow in here, but a lot of the time, if you have a head that's as dead as the one that I've put on here, that's got a felt strip around it and it's a double ply, you probably won't even need it if you've tuned it well. The other thing I run into a lot, and I think I'll set this down and move the camera. A lot of new drummers who buy some random Craigslist kit or something that they've inherited and they haven't spent a whole lot of time getting to know it, they have a tendency to set these either way too high, where this is like floating like way up in the air, or it's not even lifted at all and it's the bottom of the drum is actually touching the floor. I'm not saying that one way is better than the other really, but knowing what you're doing with this can give you a whole lot more control over how the body of the drum resonates. Especially if you've got two full heads, you really want to lift this thing off the ground so the only place that it's touching is right where the beater is. So having some space underneath here is a really, really good idea. Now again, with how you want your kick drum to sound, some people would absolutely hate the sound of this open drum that's just all beat and no after effect. But let me show you what it sounds like. I'm just gonna use our old trusty Shure Beta 52. This thing's been around forever. I'm just gonna put it right about here, just inside the drum, a little bit off axis. Now, if you want even less resonance in the sound of your drum, get an old funky pillow can actually do a lot of good if you don't want to spend the money on some of the felted carpet or other things that they sell specifically for inside of a drum. Sometimes having it against the non-beater head can be good to lower resonance if you have one. Sometimes putting it right up against the head to cancel out any aftershock from the drum vibrating too much, or sometimes just right in the middle of the drum just to soak up some resonance in the body. So this is an open drum kit, so it's not like a normal, most people don't do this, but just to show the difference between what I did before that had no pillow and now with a pillow, I'll kick it. So one of the things that I like to do when I'm retuning a snare drum is I like to start with the bottom head of the snare, because there's a lot of things going on with the bottom head, because this is really kind of the overtone of the drum, because when you hit it and you have these snares up against the drum rattling, it's going to be rattling at that pitch, whatever that resonance is of this head. So one of the ways that it's easiest is to actually stick a drumstick underneath this so that it's floating, so while you're trying to hear your tuning, it's not going the whole time. So I just want to show you, I don't know how well you guys can hear this, but there's different tunings already just because of the way that the bottom of this drum is shaped to make room for the snare strap. So if I go here, like these all have a pretty similar tension to start. The ones nearest, the two that are closest to the snares, usually have a lower resonance, and sometimes you can get around that by over tightening them, but that might not be a good idea for the drum because it might not like that. So you have to play around with your particular snare drum and find what it likes as far as resonant peaks go. So I like a really high pitch bottom snare head to start. And this head is actually a little bit thicker than I usually use on the bottom of my snare, but because this snare drum is a 13-inch instead of a 14, I wanted to see what it would be like to have a deeper resonant on the bottom. So we're trying something new today. See how it turns out. So that's somewhere decent. I'm gonna flip it over and get started on this brand new top head. So with these guys, same sort of thing. I try to start out with the similar tension. This might be a little bit high, a little low. Okay, that's pretty close. And then what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll do my knee thing again. But since I've already done that, I'm just gonna push on it with my hands like this, just to make sure that everything's good again. Cool. All right. See, just that little bit of pushing changed the tone of the drum, so it's lower now. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna start tuning. I'm gonna pick right here just as a place to start, and I'm gonna go across, and then the one next to that, and across, next to that, across, next to that, across. It's just something I've found over the years that it kind of helps level everything out. So wherever you start, just do like quarter or half a turn, whatever you feel like. In this case, I feel like it's low enough that I'm gonna tighten a whole half turn. So half turn meaning like from wherever your starting point is, 1/2 turn all the way around. Then I'm gonna go over one. Oops, that wasn't quite a full half turn. Then a half turn here, then here, here, and then here. This one feels a little bit looser, so I'm going to go even more just to get it the same kind of tension. That feels about right. And then half turn here. Now let's hear what the tone is. See, that's a lot higher already. You might have to play a little bit to get them all around the same tension. It's still low. Now, this kind of technique only works when you have an even number of lugs. Some drum kits out there will actually have 5 lugs on a drum. Gretsch is like that. Some old Ludwigs that I've come across, just depends on your drum. You can get good tuning out of any kind of drum. You just have to play with it for a while and find what you want out of it. So in this case, because it's a 13-inch, it's meant to be a higher pitch snare than, say, some deep, 7-inch, 14-inch thing. I'm gonna go for a higher kind of snap, but I want to continue to have the nice like wood resonant like this note in there, as well as what the head is bringing. Already, I'm kind of liking that. This one. There's always one lug. Still you. That's pretty even. So now let's engage the snares and so that might be too high and annoying for the song that we're trying to record, but it really depends on the drummer. And just so you know, when you first tune up a brand new head, it's going to stretch a little bit. So if you tune it just a little bit high and you get a good even tuning on it and you've cracked all your glue, it should settle into a good resonance on both ends. So I'm gonna let this sit overnight, and this is typically a really good idea if you can. Tune your drums a couple of days or at least a day before you go into the studio, because they need some time to get used to being in the new configuration, and it's just like putting on new strings for a guitar. You just want to have a little time for them to settle in, otherwise they're going to be wonky on you all day long. So I hope you found this useful, and if you have any other questions about drum stuff or anything, please leave us a comment, question, contact us through the website, and again, thanks for watching.